We have some very important news coming out of the sports card world. The record for most expensive sports card has been broken. We are only 2 weeks into 2021, and all of the records from 2020 have all been broken. All the records from history have been broken. PWCC recently sold a 1952 PSA 9 Mickey Mantle for $5.2 million, and here's what you need to know. This card is extremely rare. There are only 1,400 cards graded by PSA ever. There's only 3 PSA 10s, and this was one of the only 6 PSA 9s that have recently sold. The previous sale of a PSA 9 was back in 2018, where the card that held the previous record up until 2020, that card sold for $2.8 million. So almost doubling the last price of the record-breaking card from 2018. So these cards have a very interesting story. It was one of the first Topps annual sets that they started coming out with, and they had a checklist that was essentially card 1 to 310, and then 311 to 400. So what they did was kind of what they do with Heritage High Number now, where they have the first set of cards come out at the beginning of the season, and then they have the second set of cards coming out at the end of the season. So this card is number 311. So it was the first card of the second round of sets that were coming out. This second set of cards were numbered 311 to 407. So Mickey Mantle was number 311, and what they did with this second round of cards that actually came out was they printed a pretty decent amount of them. So they actually printed almost double the amount of sets they printed from that first one. So in theory, the Mantle card shouldn't be super rare compared to some of the other cards from 1952. Well, here's what happened. So Topps actually was having some trouble selling these cards, and I've seen 2 different stories of this told. I've heard that the cards were actually dumped into the Atlantic Ocean, and if you read the ESPN article that recently came out, they were actually dumped into the Hudson River, so I'm not 100% sure which one is which. I've heard both stories, but the overall point here is that the sets that, from what I've seen on Twitter, someone said that there was roughly between 300 and 500 cases that were actually dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I posted this on TikTok. It's actually one of my most viral TikToks back in 2019, was talking about the $2.8 million sale, and a lot of people said that they are going to get their scuba gear and they're actually going to go into the water. And I think that's a pretty funny joke. I mean, obviously, they're obviously not there anymore because that was in the 60s, I think, is when they eventually got rid of the cards. But so these cards were dumped into the water, so a ton of the actual Mantle rookies didn't even exist. They don't even exist anymore because they were dumped into the water and ruined. But of this 1952 set, if you go to the PSA Pop Report, you are going to have to filter it by either you add 300, 400, or 500 cards onto the set if you want to get it all onto the one page. But in total, there are 268,000 cards from this 1952 set that are graded by PSA. So the Mantle, with it only being 1,400, and it's going to be one of the more rare cards from the set because it came in that second set, but it also was, a lot of them were destroyed. So that's why, other than Mantle being one of the better baseball players of all time, that's why one of these cards is so rare and such an important set in the hobby. The person who bought this card's name is Rob Go. So he is the owner of Dope, the clothing line that you'll see in a lot of music videos, and a lot of artists like this brand. He is an entrepreneur who has made his career buying and selling companies. So to see an interesting thing about him, I think, and just with this sale of the card in general, is what we've sort of seen from a lot of these other sales is that there hasn't been really too much publicity that has come out of who bought the card. Like, sometimes you'll see, like, the Vegas Dave sale, so everybody knows the one-of-one Mike Trout that sold in 2020, that sold for $3.8 million. That card was owned by Vegas Dave, a sports gambler who runs like a sports gambling empire kind of, and he actually has a lot of Derek Carr cards as well. If you've heard him and heard him talk about his collection, he has a lot of Derek Carr cards. But back in 2018, he also bought the one-of-one Mike Trout, and at the time he bought it for $400,000, which at the time, you know, a $400,000 card was wild, and then same with the $2.8 million card. Like, it was astronomical the amount that card was sold for, and now you're obviously seeing the one-of-one Mike Trout broke the record at $3.8 million, and now this Mickey Mantle is selling for, or it did sell for $5.2 million, which is extremely crazy. Another important piece of information with all of this is that right now on Golden Auction, there's actually a PSA 8 that's being auctioned off that's going to be selling at the end of January. So in my prediction for this card is that it's probably going to be over $1 million. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes way over that. But because of this sale right here, I definitely think that rises the price of what I think this PSA 8 is going to sell for. I also had a prediction just based off of the previous sale of a PSA 9 from 2018 being $2.8 million. I had a prediction that the PSA 10 actually is probably in the $15 to $20 million range. So one of my predictions actually was that we were going to see one of these sales of the PSA 10 this year. And now I don't know if we're going to see it in an auction or if it's going to be sold privately. If it gets sold privately, there's a chance that we may not hear about it. But I just, I think the marketing and publicity that comes with selling a card like this, I think it's worth whoever is selling it and buying it to kind of be someone who wants to either get more publicity for their company or for themselves. This is a perfect example. I think, we've seen ESPN, like any big sports media company has basically written about this card already. So if you are interested in checking more information out, there's tons of articles. Make sure you go over to my Instagram because a lot of the stuff that I talked about in this video, I actually broke down in an Instagram post and added a bunch of different things about the card. So what I think this means for the hobby. One of the questions that I think I have is what happens to the Jordan PSA 10? That's kind of one of the first things that popped into my head. Like, a lot of people think that could be $1 million card. I think there's 317 of them right now, PSA 10s. And I think with it being a 35-year-old card, which also I think the fact that it's 35, this is the 35th anniversary of that card releasing in 1986. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a bunch of them sell this year and them getting a bunch of publicity through these other media companies and people doing a kind of retrospective look back at the brand and what all happened there. And I know what you're saying. Why Jordan's rookie year was in 1986. Why would that be considered his rookie card versus also there's other cards that are older that aren't considered his rookie cards. So it was the Fleer set was the first licensed set by the NBA. So there is a set called the Star from 1965, but that set wasn't licensed. So, and also with that set, it was almost like team sets that they have now. So if you go into like Newbury Comics or sometimes Targets and Walmarts have this, if you go in there, you're going to find the team sets. That's how they were broken up with this Star Michael Jordan in the Bulls set. Also, there was like All-Star sets that he was in. So that's kind of why the 1986 Fleer card is considered the rookie card versus a card that like is older and it's just because it wasn't licensed essentially. So what I think could happen with this Jordan card, with it being 35 years old, I would be surprised if we see any more PSA 10s. I think there are still unsealed, sealed cases and boxes that haven't been opened yet. I would say the amount of them probably isn't pretty high, but at the same time, I think that now that this set has been 35 years old, I would be very surprised if we saw more than one or two. I would be surprised if we saw any, but like if one or two pop up, that wouldn't surprise me that much. But I think seeing these holy grails sell, I think is getting more people into the hobby. I mean, to put a number like $5.2 million on one card, I think it's inconceivable almost. It almost doesn't make sense to people if they're not into sports cards, and even being in sports cards, it's still something that I think is very crazy. And I think seeing all of these articles about it, and there's still sales every single day that are going to continue to break records. And I think, like I said, the one question with that Michael Jordan card, does it now become $1 million card? Because I would say Michael Jordan may be the most famous athlete of all time, at least in basketball for sure, but he, just based off of his cultural relevance with like sneakers, and he owns the Charlotte Hornets now. Based off his cultural relevance, I think that card becomes sort of like an art piece. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if that card sells for $1 million. I think with there being over 300 of them, I don't know if it's going to happen as quickly as maybe people think, but at the same time, like, if you had asked me a year ago, do you think that there's going to be a sports card that sells for $5.2 million, I probably would say no. Like, I definitely was high on the Mike Trout card, but I didn't know when we were going to see any other sales, like of a PSA 9 or a PSA 10 of this Mantle card. So, I think, there's going to be some more cards. I don't know what card has a chance to break this record. I would say that there probably won't be another card that breaks this record, maybe until the PSA 10 Mantle sells or another PSA 9 sells, because the amount of them and the relevance of the card, I think, add a huge difference than comparing that to like the Mike Trout 1 of 1. Like, I think there's maybe a chance that Mike Trout 1 of 1 eventually breaks the record, but I don't see that happening for at least between like 3 to maybe even 7 years from now. I would say the Mike Trout card, probably he has to retire, or he has to win a championship, or he has to do something in the league for his card to go up. And if not, then it's going to be just when he basically makes a Hall of Fame. I think that's probably a chance where we will see the Mike Trout card be more expensive than this $5.2 million Mickey Mantle card that recently sold.